wind cut through the Wyoming territory like a knife sharpened on ice, carrying with it the promise of another brutal winter. Sawyer Reed pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders as he guided his horse down the frozen trail toward Dry Creek. The leather of his saddle creaked with each step, a rhythm as familiar as his own heartbeat after 14 years of working the same stretch of land. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air, mingling with the steam rising from his horse's nostrils. The animal, a sturdy bay mare named Duchess, picked her way carefully along the path worn smooth by countless trips to town. Sawyer had made this journey more times than he cared to count, always alone, always with the same list of supplies rattling around in his head: flour, coffee, ammunition, salt, the essentials that kept a man alive through the long months when the snow piled high enough to bury dreams. The homestead he'd left behind sat empty save for the chickens and the stubborn milk cow that refused to give up her ghost despite her advancing years. No wife waited by the fire, no children played in the yard, just the endless cycle of seasons and the work that never seemed to end. Sawyer had grown comfortable with the solitude, or at least that's what he told himself on nights when the wind howled like a wounded animal and the walls seemed to press in from all sides. Dry Creek appeared through the swirling snow like a collection of children's blocks scattered across the valley floor. Smoke rose from chimneys in lazy spirals, and the sound of hammering echoed from the blacksmith's shop. The town had grown some in recent years, fed by the promise of the railroad that everyone said was coming but never quite seemed to arrive. New buildings sprouted between the old ones like weeds after rain, but the heart of the place remained unchanged: the general store, the saloon, the church with its white steeple pointing accusingly at heaven. Sawyer tied Duchess to the hitching post outside Morrison's general store and stamped his feet to restore feeling to his toes. The familiar bell above the door announced his arrival, and old Pete Morrison looked up from his ledger with eyes that had seen too many winters. "Sawyer," the shopkeeper said by way of greeting. "List." Sawyer handed over the paper he'd carefully written out the night before. His handwriting was neat despite his calloused hands, a remnant of the education his mother had insisted upon before consumption took her. Pete squinted at the list and began gathering items, moving through his store with the efficiency of long practice. The warmth of the shop began to seep into Sawyer's bones, but with it came a restlessness he couldn't quite name. He'd been feeling it more lately, a sense that something was missing from his orderly life. He pushed the thought away. A man who started wanting things he couldn't have was a man headed for trouble. "That'll be $12.40, Pete said, stacking the supplies on the counter. Sawyer counted out the money, noting how his funds were running lower than he'd like. The early freeze had killed some of his crops, and beef prices were down. He'd need to be careful through the winter, maybe take on some work if any was to be had. As he loaded his purchases into his saddlebags, a scent caught his attention: fresh bread, warm and yeasty, drifting from the bakery next door. His stomach reminded him that he'd left before dawn with nothing but bitter coffee in his belly. He had enough money for a loaf, he reasoned. Fresh bread would be a welcome change from the hardtack and biscuits that formed the backbone of his diet. The bakery was a new addition to Dry Creek, run by a German couple who'd arrived the previous spring. The husband did the baking while his wife, a woman with arms like ham hocks and a disposition to match, handled the customers. Sawyer had bought from them a few times, enough to know the bread was worth the price even if the conversation wasn't. He pushed open the door and was immediately enveloped in warmth and the aroma of fresh-baked goods. Display cases showed off loaves and rolls, cookies and small cakes that seemed almost sinful in their decadence. But it was the scene near the back counter that stopped him in his tracks. A young woman crouched on the floor, gathering crumbs that had fallen from the cooling racks. Her dress, which might once have been white, was torn at the hem and stained with mud. Her hair, a dark auburn that caught the light from the windows, hung in tangled strands around her face. She moved with desperate efficiency, stuffing the crumbs into her mouth with fingers that shook from cold or hunger or both. The baker's wife stood over her, face red with indignation. "Out, out! You thief, I told you yesterday. No begging in my shop." The young woman looked up, and Sawyer saw her face clearly for the first time. She couldn't have been more than 25, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of prairie grass after rain. But it was the expression in those eyes that struck him a mixture of pride and desperation that he recognized from his own reflection in the years after his parents died. "Please," the woman said, her voice hoarse. "I'm not begging. I'll work. I can clean." Or, "Work." The baker's wife laughed, a harsh sound like breaking glass. "Look at you in that wedding dress, dragging your shame through my shop. Everyone knows what you are. Lucas Avel's runaway bride, with a price on your head. You think I'd hire a thief?" The young woman flinched but didn't retreat. She finished gathering the crumbs with careful dignity, then stood. The wedding dress, Sawyer realized, was what remained of what must have been an expensive gown. Lace hung in tatters, and the silk was water-stained and dirty. She'd been wearing it for days, maybe longer. "I'm no thief," she said quietly. "Whatever they told you—" "Out!" The baker's wife grabbed a broom, brandishing it like a weapon. "Before I call the sheriff." The young woman turned to leave, and her eyes met Sawyer's. For a moment, something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, though they'd never met. The lonely cowboy rode in town alone for supplies, but found a hungry bride begging for bread, and suddenly understood that some hungers went deeper than the belly. "Wait," Sawyer heard himself say. Both women turned to look at him. "I'll take 2 loaves of your wheat bread," he told the baker's wife, "and whatever rolls you have that are still warm." The woman's demeanor changed instantly, the broom disappearing behind the counter. "Of course, Mr. Reed, right away," while she gathered his order. Sawyer kept his eyes on the young woman. She stood frozen near the door, watching him with a wariness that spoke of recent betrayals. He recognized that look too, the careful calculation of someone who had learned that kindness often came with a price. The baker's wife returned with a paper sack bulging with bread. "That'll be 60 cents. Sawyer paid without complaint, though it was more than he'd planned to spend. He took the sack and walked to where the young woman stood. Up close, he could see the purple shadows under her eyes, the way her lips were cracked from the cold. "Here," he said, holding out the sack. She looked at it like it might be a trap. "I can't pay you. I didn't ask you to. I don't take charity." "Then don't." Sawyer set the sack on a nearby shelf. "I'm leaving it here. What happens to it after I go is none of my concern." He turned to leave, then stopped. The wind outside had picked up, and through the windows he could see snow beginning to fall in earnest. He unwound the wool scarf from his neck, a gift from his mother, one of the few things of hers he still had, and laid it beside the bread. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. Then he was out the door before she could respond. The cold hit him like a physical blow, but he welcomed it. It cleared his head, reminded him who he was. A man who minded his own business, a man who didn't get involved in other people's troubles. He had supplies to load and a long ride home ahead of him. But as he secured his purchases to Duchess's saddle, he couldn't shake the image of those green eyes, the dignity in her bearing despite her circumstances. A runaway bride, the baker's wife had said, with a price on her head. Sawyer knew the name Lucas Avel, everyone in the territory did. Railroad money, political connections, a reputation for getting what he wanted regardless of the cost. "None of my concern," he muttered to Duchess, who flicked her ears in what might have been agreement or reproach. He was about to mount up when he heard the bakery door open behind him. He didn't turn, but he could feel her presence, could hear the slight catch in her breathing. "Mister," she called. He stopped but didn't turn around. "Thank you." Now he did turn. She stood in the doorway, the scarf wrapped around her thin shoulders, the bag of bread clutched to her chest like a baby. In the falling snow, with her tangled hair and torn dress. She looked like something out of a fairy tale his mother used to tell, the kind where the princess had to earn her happy ending through suffering. "Name's Sawyer Reed," he said. "I've got a homestead about 10 miles north, if you're looking for work." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. He hadn't planned to make the offer, hadn't even considered it until the words were hanging in the air between them like the snowflakes that danced around her head. "I don't—" she started, then stopped. He saw her throat work as she swallowed. "Why would you do that?" It was a fair question, one he couldn't fully answer himself. "Ranch work's hard," he said instead. "Nothing fancy. Cooking, cleaning, tending the animals when needed. Room and board plus $2 a week. You don't know anything about me. I know you're hungry. I know you're too proud to beg, but not too proud to take honest work. That's enough for now." She studied him for a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing more than he meant to show. Then she nodded. Once decisive. "Margaret Sullivan," she said, "though most call me Maggie." Not her real name? He'd bet his ranch on it. But then, out here everyone was running from something. Names were just another thing you could leave behind. "There's a stable at the end of the street," he said. "I'll be leaving in an hour. If you're there, you've got a job. If not, well, I wish you luck." He mounted Duchess and rode off without looking back, though he could feel her eyes on him until he turned the corner. At the stable, he took his time checking Duchess's hooves, adjusting the saddle. Anything to avoid thinking about what he'd just done. He'd lived alone for 6 years. Liked it that way. No complications, no expectations, no one to disappoint or be disappointed by. But when the hour was up and he led Duchess out of the stable, she was there. She'd tried to clean herself up some, her face washed and her hair pulled back, though the dress was beyond saving. She carried nothing but the bread and his scarf. "No bags?" he asked. "Nothing to pack." He nodded and mounted up, then held out his hand. She looked at it for a moment before taking it, letting him pull her up behind him. She was lighter than he'd expected, like a bird built of hollow bones. "Hold on," he said. "It's a long ride." Her arms went around his waist, tentative at first, then tighter as Duchess began to move. They rode out of Dry Creek in silence, the snow falling heavier now, blanketing the world in white. Behind them, the town disappeared into the storm. Ahead, the trail home stretched out like a promise or a threat, depending on how you looked at it. Sawyer had lived through enough Wyoming winters to know that storms could blow in fast and hard, burying the unwary. But sometimes, he thought as he felt the warmth of another human being at his back for the first time in years, sometimes you had to take shelter where you found it and hope for the best. The bread in her arms would be cold by the time they reached the homestead, but it would still be good, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to start with. The homestead emerged from the storm like a ship from fog, its weathered boards dark against the white landscape. Maggie's arms tightened around Sawyer's waist as Duchess picked her way down the final slope. He could feel her shivering through his coat, though whether from cold or something else, he couldn't say. "That's it," he said, the first words either of them had spoken in miles. The cabin wasn't much to look at. A single-story structure with a lean-to attached for storage and a small barn set back from the main building. Smoke still curled from the chimney, a good sign that the fire hadn't died completely in his absence. He'd built the place himself over the course of a summer, learning as he went, making mistakes and fixing them. The walls were true, if not pretty, the roof sound, if not elegant. He dismounted first, then helped Maggie down. She stumbled slightly, her legs stiff from the ride, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. She pulled away as soon as she found her footing, that wariness still in her eyes. "I'll see to the horse," he said. "Door's not locked. Fire should still have some life in it." She nodded and made her way to the cabin, moving carefully through the deepening snow. Sawyer watched her go, wondering again what madness had possessed him. He'd broken his own cardinal rule, don't get involved, yet here he was, involved up to his neck. Duchess whickered softly as he led her into the barn. "I know, girl," he murmured. "I know." By the time he'd rubbed down the mare, given her feed and fresh water, and secured the barn against the storm, full dark had fallen. The wind howled around the corners of the buildings, and the snow came sideways now, stinging any exposed skin. He pulled his collar up and made for the cabin, eager for its warmth despite his misgivings about what awaited him inside. She'd built up the fire and lit one of the oil lamps, casting a warm glow through the single room that served as kitchen, parlor, and dining room all in one. She stood by the stove, still wearing his scarf but having shed her ruined shoes by the door. Her stockings were more holes than fabric. "I didn't touch anything," she said quickly. "Just the firewood." "That's what it's there for?" He hung his coat on a peg by the door and tried to see his home through her eyes. The furniture was sparse but well made, a table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the fire, shelves lined with preserves and dry goods. His bed was in the far corner, curtained off for privacy. A ladder led to the loft where he stored extra supplies and where, he supposed, she would sleep. "Are you hungry?" he asked, then almost laughed at the question. Of course she was hungry. "I still have the bread," she said, holding up the sack as if to prove her words. "Save it. I've got stew that needs eating." He moved to the stove, aware of how she shifted to maintain distance between them, always keeping the table or a chair as a barrier. Smart woman. He pulled the pot of rabbit stew from the back of the stove where it had been keeping warm and ladled generous portions into 2 bowls. "Sit," he said, placing one bowl on the table. She sat carefully, as if expecting the chair to be yanked away. When he took his own seat across from her, she picked up the spoon and took a small, tentative bite. Then her eyes closed, and she made a sound that was almost a sob. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "A real meal. I mean—" "3 days ago. Maybe 4. She opened her eyes, seemed to realize how quickly she'd answered, and her walls went back up. "The stew is good, thank you." They ate in silence for a while. The only sounds the crackle of the fire and the wind rattling the windows. She ate slowly, he noticed, savoring each bite despite what must have been ravenous hunger. Good manners had been trained into her somewhere, along with that straight-backed posture and the way she held her spoon. "You're not Margaret Sullivan," he said finally. She stilled, spoon halfway to her mouth. "Does it matter?" "Not particularly. But if someone comes looking for Margaret Sullivan, I'd like to know if I should point them toward my hired help or play dumb." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Play dumb. My name is—" She paused, then seemed to make a decision. Margot Prescott. Though I suppose it's Margot Avil now. Or was. I'm not entirely sure how it works when you run away before the wedding night is over. Sawyer kept his expression neutral, though inside he cursed. Lucas Avil's bride. He'd heard about the wedding. Of course, everyone had. The biggest social event in 3 territories. They'd said, railroad money marrying Southern aristocracy. The newspapers had been full of it. "How much is the bounty?" he asked. $500 for my return. 1,000 if I'm brought back with the stolen property." "What property?" Her laugh was bitter. "A brooch, my grandmother's, actually, though Lucas claimed it as part of my dowry. It's worth more than this cabin and everything in it. I'm supposed to have taken it when I left." "Did you—" She met his eyes directly. "No, though I doubt that matters. Lucas says I took it, so I took it. That's how truth works in his world." Sawyer pushed his empty bowl aside and really looked at her. Beneath the dirt and exhaustion, she was beautiful in that delicate way that spoke of gentle breeding. But there was steel there too, in the set of her jaw and the way she held herself even now, when she had every reason to crumble. "Why'd you run?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Have you ever made a choice that seemed right at the time, only to realize too late that you'd sold yourself into hell?" My father had debts. Lucas had money. It seemed a simple enough transaction. "Marriage usually is," Sawyer said dryly. "This wasn't a marriage. It was a business arrangement dressed up in white silk and orange blossoms. I knew that going in. I thought I could endure it. Play the part of the dutiful wife, the ornament on his arm. But there are some prices that are too high to pay. Mr. Reed. Some things that, once broken, can't be fixed." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't ask. He'd seen enough of the world to fill in the blanks himself. "Well," he said, standing and collecting the bowls, "you're here now. The work I mentioned is real. This place doesn't run itself. You do your part. You'll have a roof over your head and food in your belly. We'll figure out the rest as we go. And the bounty." "Let me worry about that." He washed the dishes while she sat by the fire, warming her feet. When he turned back, she was fighting to keep her eyes open. "Loft's up there," he said, pointing to the ladder. "There are blankets and a straw tick. It's not fancy, but it's warm and dry. Privy's out back. I'd wait till morning if you can. Chamber pot's under the bed if you can't." She stood, swaying slightly. "Mr. Reed, Sawyer, why are you doing this?" He considered the question, then gave her the only answer he had. "A woman shouldn't have to beg for bread. Doesn't seem right." She nodded as if this made perfect sense, then made her way to the ladder. She climbed slowly, her torn dress hampering her movements. At the top, she turned back. "I'll earn my keep," she said. "I promise you that." "I know you will." After she disappeared into the loft, Sawyer banked the fire and prepared for bed. But sleep didn't come easily. He lay in the dark, listening to the storm outside and the occasional creak from above as she settled in. He'd lived alone so long that the presence of another person in his space felt strange, like wearing a shirt that didn't quite fit. In the morning, he woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving quietly around his kitchen. For a moment, still caught between sleep and waking, he thought he was a boy again and his mother was preparing breakfast. Then reality reasserted itself, and he remembered the woman in the loft, the choices he'd made. She'd found one of his shirts and a pair of trousers, rolling up the sleeves and legs to make them fit. The wedding dress lay folded neatly by the door, ready for burning. She'd washed her face and pulled her hair back into a simple bun, and in the morning light, he could see the bruises on her wrists that the dress's long sleeves had hidden. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the clothes. "I can't work in that thing." "Keep them. I've got others." She'd made biscuits to go with the coffee, using the bread flour from his supplies. They were light and fluffy, better than anything he'd managed in 6 years of bachelor cooking. "Where'd you learn to cook?" "My grandmother's kitchen, mostly, before Father lost the plantation." She set a plate in front of him. "I can do more than cook. I can read and write. Do figures. I know herbs and basic doctoring. I can sew and mend. I'll pull my weight." Never doubted it. After breakfast, he showed her around the homestead properly. The root cellar with its stores of potatoes and turnips. The smokehouse with its strips of venison and rabbit. The chicken coop with its 5 hardy hens. She took it all in with those sharp green eyes, asking practical questions about feeding schedules and egg collection. "It's not much," he said as they stood in the barn, watching the snow fall through the open door. "But it keeps me fed and puts a little money aside most years." "It's honest," she said. "That's more than most can say." He pulled a knife from his belt, a good steel blade with a bone handle. "Here, you'll need this for kitchen work and such." She took it carefully, testing the weight and balance. "It's a good knife." "Should be. I made it." She looked at him with surprise. "You're a blacksmith." "When I need to be. Man learns a lot of trades out here." She tucked the knife into her belt, and something in the gesture, the casual acceptance of the tool, The weapon told him more about Margot Prescott Avil than any words could have. The rest of the day passed in a blur of small tasks and adjustments. She took to the work without complaint, mucking out stalls and gathering eggs as if she'd been doing it all her life. Maybe she had, before the debts and the marriage and whatever had driven her to run. That evening, as they ate a simple dinner of fried eggs and the bread she'd been given in town, she said, "There's something you should know. Lucas won't give up easily. He's not a man who likes to lose, and a runaway bride is a very public loss." "I figured as much. I won't bring trouble to your door any longer than necessary. Once the storm passes, once I have earned enough." "Where would you go?" She had no answer for that. "Stay as long as you need," he said. "We'll handle whatever comes." That night, he gave her the knife to keep by her bedside. "Just in case," he said, and she nodded, understanding passing between them. As he lay in his bed, listening to the storm beginning to blow itself out, Sawyer reflected on how quickly life could change. This morning he'd been a man alone, content in his solitude. Tonight, there was a woman in his loft, a knife by her side, and the promise of trouble on the horizon. But when he finally drifted off to sleep, it was with the memory of her smile when she'd tasted the stew. That moment when hunger and relief had broken through her careful control. Whatever storm was coming, whatever price he might pay for his impulsive kindness, that smile made it worthwhile. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, he knew, but tonight, in his small cabin on the Wyoming frontier, two lost souls had found shelter from more than just the weather. And for now, that was enough. 2 weeks passed in relative peace, long enough for Sawyer to grow accustomed to the sound of another person in his home. Margot had proven as good as her word, taking on her share of work without complaint. The cabin had never been cleaner, the meals never better, and slowly, the wary tension in her eyes began to ease. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Sawyer was in the barn, repairing a harness, when Duchess began to stamp and snort. He knew that sound, strangers approaching. Through a crack in the barn door, he saw 3 riders making their way down the trail, their horses' breath steaming in the cold air. The man in the lead sat his mount like someone born to the saddle, his coat expensive despite the trail dust, even from a distance. Sawyer could see the paired Colts at his hips and the rifle in his saddle scabbard. This was no casual visitor. Sawyer set down his tools and checked his own weapon, then stepped out of the barn. The riders had stopped at the edge of his property, waiting. It was an old courtesy, announcing yourself before approaching a man's home. It also gave both parties time to size each other up. "Morning," Sawyer called out, keeping his tone neutral. "Morning to you," the lead rider replied. He was younger than Sawyer had expected, maybe 30, with the kind of carefully maintained mustache that spoke of vanity. "My name's Ethan Cole. These are my associates, Mr. Briggs and Mr. Donnelly. We're looking for someone who might have passed this way." "A lot of people pass this way," Sawyer said. "It's the main trail to Dry Creek." Cole smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. This would be a particular someone. A woman, young, pretty, auburn hair, goes by Margaret Sullivan, though she might be using another name. "What's your interest in her?" "Professional." Cole reached into his coat slowly, telegraphing the movement, and pulled out a folded paper. "There's a bounty on her, theft of valuable property. Her husband wants her back, along with what she took." "Husband?" "Lucas Avil. Perhaps you've heard the name." Sawyer had, of course. Everyone in 3 territories knew that name. Railroad money, political connections. A man who collected people the way others collected horses. "Can't say I've seen anyone matching that description," Sawyer said. "But then, I keep to myself mostly." Cole nodded as if he'd expected that answer. His eyes drifted toward the cabin, where smoke rose from the chimney, and Sawyer cursed inwardly. Laundry hung on the line. Women's clothes, clearly visible even from here. "Living alone, are you?" Cole asked. "My business is my own." "True enough. Mind if we water our horses? It's been a long ride from town." It would be suspicious to refuse such a basic courtesy. "Trough's by the barn. Help yourselves." The three men dismounted and led their horses to the water. Sawyer watched them carefully, noting how they positioned themselves, how their eyes swept the property. These weren't ordinary bounty hunters. They were professionals, experienced and dangerous. "Nice place you have here," Cole said conversationally as his horse drank. "Must get lonely, though. A man needs companionship." "I manage." "I'm sure you do." Cole's smile was sharp as a blade. Still, if someone were to offer shelter to a fugitive even unknowingly, that could cause all sorts of problems. Legal problems, the kind that can cost a man his land. The threat was subtle but clear. Sawyer felt his temper rise but kept it in check. "Good thing I haven't seen any fugitives, then." "Good thing," Cole agreed. He pulled out a card and handed it to Sawyer. "I'll be staying at the Continental Hotel in Dry Creek for a few days, if you happen to remember anything, or if anyone matching that description shows up. I'd appreciate hearing about it. The reward is substantial, $500, more than most men see in a year." "I'll keep that in mind." Cole mounted his horse with fluid grace. "You do that, Mr. Reed, Sawyer Reed." "Mr. Reed." Cole touched the brim of his hat. "We'll be going now, but I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other again." The three men rode off, and Sawyer waited until they were out of sight before returning to the barn. His hands were steady as he picked up his tools, but his mind raced. Cole would be back. That was certain. Men like him didn't give up easily, especially not with a $1,000 bounty at stake. He found Margot in the root cellar, organizing preserves. She looked up when he descended the ladder, and he saw from her expression that she'd been watching from the window. "Bounty hunters," he said simply. "I know. I recognize the one in front. Ethan Cole. Lucas has used him before." Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped a jar. "I should leave. Tonight. I've brought enough trouble to your door." "Where would you go?" "West, California. Maybe somewhere Lucas's reach doesn't extend." "His reach extends wherever money does. Besides, you try to run now. Cole will know that I was hiding you. He's probably got men watching the roads." She set down the jar carefully. "Then what do we do?" "We wait. We're careful, and we don't give him any reason to come back." That evening, they ate dinner in tense silence. Margot had made venison stew, but neither of them had much appetite. As she cleared the dishes, she said quietly, "I need to tell you something about why I ran, about what really happened." Sawyer nodded and settled into his chair by the fire. She sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap, and for a moment she seemed to gather herself. "My father was a good man, but a poor businessman. After the war, after Mother died, he tried to rebuild what we'd lost, but the debts mounted, and the creditors circled like vultures. Then Lucas appeared, like something out of a fairy tale, wealthy, charming, offering to save us all." She stared into the fire as she spoke. "The wedding was everything a girl dreams of. Hundreds of guests, flowers from hothouses, a dress that cost more than most people's homes. I told myself I was lucky, that love would come in time, that I could learn to be the wife he wanted." Her voice dropped. "The wedding night taught me otherwise. Lucas doesn't want a wife. He wants a possession, something beautiful to display, to control, to use as he sees fit. When I tried to refuse him, when I said I needed time," she touched her wrists unconsciously, where the bruises had faded to yellow. "He made it clear that my wishes were irrelevant, that I'd been bought and paid for." Sawyer's jaw clenched, but he remained silent. "The brooch he claims I stole it was my grandmother's. Yes, but I had already given it to him as part of my dowry. The night I ran, I took nothing but the clothes on my back. I waited until he was asleep, drugged with whiskey, and I ran in my wedding dress, like a fool, because I didn't dare go back for anything else. You're no fool, Sawyer said firmly. You survived. That took courage. She laughed bitterly. Courage, I was terrified. I still am. Lucas doesn't like to be defied. He'll make an example of me, to show others what happens when someone challenges his authority. Not while you're under my roof. She looked at him then. Really looked at him. Why are you doing this? You could have that reward. $500 would set you up nicely. Sawyer considered the question. My mother used to say that a man's character is measured by how he treats those who can't fight back. I've failed that test more times than I care to remember. Maybe I'm trying to balance the scales. Or maybe you're just a good man. Wouldn't go that far. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Margot rose. I should turn in. Early morning tomorrow. Margot. She paused at the ladder. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. You're not alone in this. Her smile was sad but grateful. I'm beginning to believe that. The next few days passed quietly, but Sawyer could feel the tension building like storm clouds on the horizon. He made excuses to go to town, gathering information. Cole was still there, still asking questions. Worse, he'd been joined by 2 more men, hard cases with the look of hired guns. It was Mrs. Delaney at the apothecary who gave him the most troubling news. That mister, Cole's been spreading money around, she said, measuring out the headache powders Sawyer had requested. Asking about any woman new to town, any stranger. Sheriff Dobson told him to mind his business, but you know how it is. Money talks. That it does, Sawyer agreed. You be careful. Sawyer Reed. That man has the look of trouble about him. On the ride home, Sawyer made his decision. They couldn't just wait and hope Cole would give up. Men like him never gave up, not with that kind of money at stake. They needed a plan. He found Margot in the chicken coop, gathering eggs. She'd taken to wearing his old clothes exclusively now, and with her hair pulled back and a bit of dirt on her face, she could almost pass for a young man from a distance. Almost. We need to talk, he said. She set down the egg basket and followed him to the barn, where they couldn't be overheard. He told her about his trip to town, about Cole's questions and the additional men. He's not going away, Sawyer concluded. We need to be ready when he comes back. I won't let you fight my battles, Margot said. This isn't your Yes, it is. The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. You're under my protection now. That means something out here, or it should. She studied his face. You're not used to having someone to protect. No, he admitted, but that doesn't mean I don't know how. That night, Sawyer taught her to shoot. He'd noticed she was comfortable with the knife. But a knife wouldn't help much against men like Cole. They set up targets behind the barn, where the sound wouldn't carry too far. Hold it steady, he instructed, adjusting her grip on the revolver. Don't jerk the trigger. Squeeze it gentle-like. Her first shot went wide, but her second hit the target. By the 10th, she was grouping them respectably. You've done this before, he observed. My grandfather taught me years ago, but it's been a while. They practiced until the ammunition ran low, then cleaned the weapons together in the barn. It was domestic in a strange way, working side by side in comfortable silence. I've been thinking, Margot said as she oiled the cylinder. What if I wrote to my father? He has some influence still, some friends in government. Maybe. Would he help? Her silence was answer enough. Then we handle this ourselves. Sawyer said, whatever comes, we handle it ourselves. As they walked back to the cabin under a canopy of stars, Margot slipped her hand into his. It was a simple gesture, but it sent warmth through him like whiskey on a cold night. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. He squeezed her hand gently. Haven't done anything yet. You've done more than you know. Inside, as she climbed to the loft, she paused. Sawyer, what you said about balancing the scales, you're wrong. The scales were balanced the moment you handed me that bread. Everything since has been extra. She disappeared before he could respond, leaving him standing in the lamplight, wondering when exactly protecting her had become about more than just doing the right thing, when the thought of her leaving had become unbearable. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Storm coming, in more ways than one, but for tonight they were safe, together. And that, Sawyer thought as he prepared for bed, was worth whatever price he might have to pay. The moon was new when they came, leaving the homestead in darkness save for the stars scattered across the Wyoming sky. Sawyer woke to Duchess's warning whinny from the barn, a sound that had him reaching for his rifle before his feet hit the floor. Through the window, he saw them 5 shadows moving across his land with the careful precision of men who'd done this before. Cole had given up on subtlety. Margot, he called softly up to the loft. Company. She was down the ladder in seconds, fully dressed, the knife at her belt and the revolver he'd given her in her hand. In the dim light, her face was composed, but he could see the rapid pulse at her throat. How many? 5, maybe more hanging back. She moved to the window, peering out carefully. That's Cole in front. The others, I don't recognize them, but they're not locals. No, he brought in professionals. They'd discussed this possibility, made plans, but reality had a way of making plans seem foolish. 5 men, maybe more, against the 2 of them. The odds weren't good. There's still time, Sawyer said. You could slip out the back, take Duchess, ride hard for I... No, her voice was firm. I'm through running. Before he could argue, Cole's voice rang out across the yard. Reed, Sawyer, Reed, come on out. We need to talk. Seems we can talk fine from here, Sawyer called back. Now, that's not neighborly. We've ridden a long way in the cold. Least you could do is show your face. Sawyer considered. Holed up in the cabin. They had cover but were trapped. Outside, they'd be exposed but mobile. Neither option was good. What do you want, Cole? You know what I want. The woman. Hand her over, and we'll be on our way. No harm to you or your property. Can't hand over what I don't have. Cole's laugh was without humor. Come now, Reed, we both know she's in there. One of my men saw her yesterday, gathering eggs. Pretty thing, even in men's clothes. Just give her up. This doesn't have to be your fight. Seems to me when armed men come onto my land in the middle of the night, it's already my fight. There was a pause. When Cole spoke again, his voice had lost its false friendliness. I've got legal papers. Read, bounty notice, signed and sealed. You're harboring a fugitive. That makes you a criminal too, but I'm willing to overlook that. Just send her out. Margot touched Sawyer's arm. Maybe I should... No. He's right about the law. To hell with the law. The vehemence in his voice surprised him. The law that lets a man treat his wife like property. The law that puts a price on your head for running from someone who hurt you. That's no law worth following. Outside, Cole was losing patience. Last chance, Reed, send her out, or we're coming in. You're welcome to try, Sawyer replied. But I should mention I've got a clear shot at you from here, and I rarely miss. It wasn't entirely true. The darkness made accuracy difficult, but Cole didn't know that. There's 5 of us. Reed, you really want to die for some woman you barely know? Sawyer glanced at Margot, seeing the anguish in her eyes. She was blaming herself. He knew, ready to sacrifice herself to save him. He made a decision. Cole, he called out. You say you've got legal papers. Fine. Come back in the morning with the sheriff. We'll settle this proper-like, in daylight, according to the law. The sheriff's not involved in this. Then you're just a gang of armed men threatening peaceful folks. That's not legal anywhere I know of. There was murmuring outside as Cole conferred with his men. Finally, "You've got 1 hour. Reed, 1 hour to think it over. Then we're coming in, and God help anyone who gets in our way." The shadows withdrew to the edge of the property, visible as darker shapes against the snow, waiting. "They won't wait an hour," Margot said quietly. "I know." "So what do we do?" Sawyer's mind raced. 5 men, positioned to watch all exits. But they didn't know the land like he did. There was a dry wash that ran behind the barn, deep enough to provide cover, if they could reach it. "Can you ride bareback?" he asked. "Yes." "Good. Here's what we're going to do." He explained quickly, sketching a rough map on the dusty floor. The plan was risky, but it was better than waiting to be burned out or shot. They prepared swiftly and silently. Sawyer packed saddlebags with essentials ammunition, food, water, matches. Margot gathered what few possessions she had, including, he noticed, the folded wedding dress. "For evidence," she explained, seeing his look. "If we ever get a fair hearing." 20 minutes had passed. Outside, the shadows were growing restless. Time to move. They slipped out through a loose board in the back wall that Sawyer had never gotten around to fixing. Now he was grateful for his laziness. The cold hit them like a physical blow, but they pressed on, staying low, moving from shadow to shadow. The barn loomed ahead. This was the dangerous part. They'd be exposed for several yards. Sawyer went first, rifle ready, scanning the darkness. Nothing moved. He motioned for Margot to follow. They were halfway across when a shout went up. "There by the barn!" Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes lighting up the night. Sawyer grabbed Margot's hand and ran, bullets whining past them like angry bees. They dove through the barn door as splinters exploded from the frame. Duchess was stamping nervously, but Sawyer's trained hands had her saddled in seconds. No time for Margot to change, she'd have to ride in her skirts. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her. "The back door," Margot pointed. But Cole's men were ahead of them. 2 figures appeared in the doorway, guns raised. Sawyer fired from the hip, his rifle booming in the enclosed space. One man spun away, the other dove for cover. "Hold on!" Sawyer spurred Duchess forward, crashing through the partially open door. More gunfire, more shouts. He felt something tug at his coat, but kept riding. They plunged down the wash, Duchess sure-footed despite the darkness and their double weight. Behind them, confusion men shouting, horses being saddled. They'd gained time, but not much. "Where are we going?" Margot shouted over the wind. "Miller's Canyon. It's narrow, they'll have to come at us one at a time." It was 5 miles of hard riding, pushing Duchess to her limits. Twice they heard pursuit closing in, and twice Sawyer found cover, firing back to discourage followers. His ammunition was running low, but the tactic worked. Cole's men grew cautious. Miller's Canyon opened before them like a wound in the earth, its walls rising steep and jagged. Sawyer guided Duchess into its mouth, then dismounted. "Take her deeper in," he told Margot. "There's an overhang about 100 yards up. Wait there." "What are you going to do?" "Buy us time." He checked his rifle, counting cartridges. Not many left. "Go on, I'll be along." She slid down from the saddle and grasped his face between her hands. "Don't you dare die for me! Sawyer Reed!" Then she kissed him, fierce and quick, before leading Duchess away. Sawyer positioned himself behind a fallen boulder, sighting down the canyon entrance. His hands were steady, his breathing calm. This was what he knew, the simplicity of survival, of protecting what mattered. The first rider appeared, silhouetted against the lighter sky. Sawyer fired, and the man toppled from his saddle. The others pulled back, suddenly cautious. "Reed," Cole's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "This is pointless. You're trapped. No way out but through us." "Seems like a good reason to make it cost you," Sawyer replied. Another rush. 2 men this time, riding hard. Sawyer dropped one, winged the other, but they were learning. Using covering fire now. A bullet sparked off the rock near his head, driving him down. When he looked up, they were closer, too close. He fired his last round, then drew his revolver. 6 shots, 5 men, if Cole was telling the truth about numbers. No margin for error. Movement to his left. He spun, fired. A man tumbled from the canyon wall. They were trying to flank him. Smart. He'd do the same in their place. Sawyer. Margot's voice, urgent. He risked a glance back and saw her emerging from cover, the revolver in her hand. No stay back. But she was already firing, her shots disciplined and accurate. A man who'd been creeping along the opposite wall clutched his shoulder and fell. Together they held the canyon mouth, making Cole's men pay for every foot. But ammunition ran low, then out. Sawyer threw his empty revolver aside and picked up a rock. Better than nothing. That's when he heard it. Hoofbeats from behind them. His heart sank. Cole had sent men around to cut off their escape. They were surrounded. But the voice that rang out wasn't one of Cole's men. "That's enough, everyone stand down." Sheriff Dobson rode into view, badge glinting in the starlight, accompanied by 6 armed deputies. Behind them came other riders' townspeople. Sawyer realized. Mrs. Delaney was there, and the blacksmith, and even the German baker and his formidable wife. "Sheriff," Cole said smoothly, "we're conducting a legal bounty hunt. This man is harboring Ani. What you're conducting is attempted murder on my jurisdiction." Dobson cut him off. "I've got 2 dead men and at least 1 wounded. You want to explain that?" "They fired first?" "At armed men attacking their home in the dead of night. That's self-defense where I come from." Cole's voice turned hard. "I have legal papers. The woman is a fugitive." "Then you should have come to me. That's how law works in my town." Dobson turned to Sawyer. "You hurt?" "No, sir." "And the lady?" Margot stepped forward, chin high despite her disheveled appearance. "I'm unharmed. Sheriff." "Ma'am." Dobson touched his hat. "I think we'd all better head back to town and sort this out proper, in daylight, like civilized people." "The woman comes with me," Cole insisted. "The bounty." "The bounty will keep." Dobson's voice brooked no argument. "Everyone's coming to town. We'll hold a hearing. Look at these papers of yours. Hear all sides. That's how we do things here." For a moment, violence hung in the air. Cole's remaining men looked to him, hands near their weapons. The townspeople bristled, ready to defend their own. Then Cole smiled, cold and sharp. "Of course, Sheriff, we'll do this legally." His eyes found Margot. "The law's on my side, after all." The ride back to town was tense. Cole's men on one side, the townspeople on the other. Sawyer and Margot in the middle like prizes to be won. But Sawyer felt hope for the first time. The town had come for them. Whatever happened next, they weren't alone. As they rode, Margot reached over and took his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what, nearly getting you killed?" "For standing with me, for making my fight yours." "Our fight," he corrected. "It's our fight now." Dawn was breaking as they reached Dry Creek, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The town was already stirring, word spreading fast. By the time they reached the sheriff's office, a crowd had gathered. Hearing set for tomorrow. Dobson announced, "Miss, you'll stay in protective custody. Mr. Reed, you're free to go, but don't leave town." "I'm not going anywhere," Sawyer said, his eyes on Margot. As the sheriff led her inside, she looked back once. The fear was still there in her eyes, but something else too. Hope, maybe, or trust. Cole pushed through the crowd to stand before Sawyer. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "I've got the law, I've got the papers, and I've got Lucas Avel's money behind me. What do you have?" Sawyer looked around at the townspeople, his neighbors. His community. People who'd ridden out in the cold to stand for what was right. "I've got enough," he said. Cole's smile was all teeth. "We'll see about that." As the bounty hunter stalked away, "Mrs." Delaney approached. "Don't you worry. Sawyer Reed, we know what's right, even if the law doesn't always. That girl's got friends now." Looking at the determined faces around him, Sawyer began to believe it might be true. The fight wasn't over in many ways. It was just beginning. But for the first time since he'd found Margot begging for bread in the bakery, he thought they might actually have a chance. The sun climbed higher, warming the frozen ground. And in the sheriff's office, behind barred windows, a woman who'd run out of places to run sat down to wait for justice, knowing that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and clear, with the kind of crystalline light that made the Wyoming mountains stand out sharp against the sky. Sawyer had spent a restless night at the boarding house, unable to shake the image of Margot behind bars. Mrs. Delaney had assured him the sheriff's wife was looking after her, but worry gnawed at him nonetheless. The town hall was packed by 9 o'clock. Word had spread through the territory, and people had come from neighboring settlements to witness what promised to be a spectacle. At the front of the room, Judge Nathan Thornton sat behind a makeshift bench, his weathered face impassive. He was a circuit judge, known for his fairness and his refusal to be swayed by money or threats. Sawyer took a seat near the front, nodding to the familiar faces around him. The German baker's wife gave him an encouraging smile. The blacksmith, a mountain of a man named Henrik, cracked his knuckles meaningfully when Cole walked by. Cole had cleaned up for the occasion. His suit pressed and his boots shined. He'd been joined by a thin man in wire spectacles who had the look of a lawyer about him. They conferred in low voices, occasionally glancing toward the side door through which Margot would enter. "All rise," Sheriff Dobson called out, and the crowd shuffled to their feet as Judge Thornton took his seat. "Be seated," the judge said. "This is a hearing to determine the validity of a bounty claim against one Margot Prescott, also known as Margot Avil. Mr. Cole, you may present your case." The thin lawyer stood, adjusting his spectacles. "Your Honor, my name is Clarence Whitmore, representing Mr. Lucas Avil of Georgia. The facts are simple. This woman—" He gestured as Margot was brought in. "It's the lawfully wedded wife of Mr. Avil. She abandoned her husband on their wedding night, stealing valuable property in the process. We have sworn affidavits, a legal bounty notice, and the full weight of Georgia law behind us." Margot looked pale, but composed in a simple gray dress someone had found for her. Her eyes found Sawyer's across the room, and he tried to convey strength through his gaze. Whitmore produced a sheaf of papers. "The stolen property in question is a ruby brooch, valued at over $2,000. It was part of the dowry but remained in Mr. Avil's possession. The brooch was discovered missing the morning after Mrs. Avil fled." "Does Mrs. Avil have representation?" Judge Thornton asked. "I'll speak for myself, Your Honor," Margot said, standing. "That's your right, Mr. Whitmore. Continue." The lawyer launched into a detailed account of the marriage, the value of the brooch, and the damage to Lucas Avil's reputation. He painted Margot as a calculating woman who had married for money and fled when she'd gotten what she wanted. Furthermore, Whitmore concluded, "Mr. Reed here has been harboring a known fugitive. We request that he be charged as an accomplice." "One thing at a time," the judge said. "Mrs. Avil, your response." Margot stood, her hands clasped to stop their trembling. "Your Honor, I did flee my marriage. I don't deny that, but I took nothing with me except the clothes on my back. The brooch, Mr. Whitmore speaks of, I've never even seen it outside of its case. Lucas kept it locked in his study." "You were seen near the study that night," Whitmore interjected. "I was in many rooms that night," Margot replied. "It was my wedding, but I never entered his study." and I certainly never took anything." "Then why run?" Judge Thornton asked, not unkindly. Margot's composure cracked slightly. "Because I feared for my safety, Your Honor, because my husband—" She paused, gathering herself. "Because Lucas Abel is not the man he presents to society." "That's slander," Whitmore objected. "It's the truth," Margot said firmly. "On our wedding night, when I asked for time to adjust to married life, Lucas became violent. She touched her wrists unconsciously. "He made it clear that I was his property, bought and paid for, that my wishes were irrelevant. I feared what would happen if I stayed." A murmur ran through the crowd. Judge Thornton called for order. "These are serious accusations," he said. "Do you have proof?" "Only my word, Your Honor, and these—" She rolled up her sleeves, showing the faded marks on her wrists. "Though I suppose Mr. Whitmore will claim I did these to myself." "Your Honor," a new voice spoke up from the crowd. "May I address the court?" Everyone turned to see a young black woman standing near the back. She wore a maid's uniform and looked terrified but determined. "Who are you?" the judge asked. "My name is Esther Washington. Your Honor, I am employed in the Abel household." Whitmore jumped to his feet. "This woman has no standing here. I'll decide who has standing in my court." Judge Thornton said, "Continue. Miss Washington." Esther moved forward, her voice gaining strength. "I was there that night, Your Honor. I helped Mrs. Aval dress for the wedding, and I was there after, when—" She glanced at Lucas's lawyer. "When Mr. Abel came to claim his bride. And I heard her crying, Your Honor, heard her pleading, heard the sounds of—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Of struggle. The next morning, I found torn fabric from her nightgown and blood on the sheets. Not much, but enough." The crowd's murmur grew to a roar. Several women looked ready to march on Georgia themselves. "Order!" Judge Thornton banged his gavel. "Miss Washington, how did you come to be here?" "I couldn't stand it anymore. Your Honor, when I heard they were hunting Mrs. Aval like an animal, I took what money I'd saved and came west. It took me near 2 weeks, but I had to speak up. What happened to her weren't right." "Your Honor," Whitmore protested, "this woman is clearly biased, a disgruntled servant who risked everything to come here." The judge noted. "Miss Washington, what about the brooch?" "I can speak to that too, Your Honor." Esther reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper. "This is a receipt from Jacobson's Jewelry in Atlanta, dated 3 days after Mrs. Aval fled, for one ruby brooch, sold by Mr. Lucas Aval himself." The courtroom erupted. Whitmore's face went white, then red. That must be a forgery." "I have the telegraph confirmation from Jacobson's," Esther continued calmly. "They remember the transaction well. Mr. Aval said he needed quick cash for a business venture." Judge Thornton examined the papers. "These appear to be genuine. Mr. Whitmore, it seems your client sold the very item he claims was stolen." "There must be an explanation," Whitmore stammered. "Perhaps a different brooch?" "Your Honor," Margot spoke up, "there was only one ruby brooch. It was unique, made for my grandmother. Lucas knew its value, both monetary and sentimental. That's why he chose it for his lie." The judge turned to Cole. "Mr. Cole, you were hired to retrieve stolen property that, it appears, was never stolen. You've killed 2 men and wounded others in pursuit of a false bounty." Cole's face was stone. "I was acting on information provided by my client." "Information that was false. Sheriff Dobson, I'm dismissing all charges against Mrs. Abel. Furthermore, I'm issuing a warrant for Lucas Aval's arrest on charges of fraud and filing a false bounty. Mr. Cole." You and your men will leave this territory immediately, or face charges yourselves. Your Honor. Sawyer stood. What about Mrs. Avel's safety? Her husband won't take this quietly. Judge Thornton considered. Mrs. Avel, do you wish to remain married to Lucas Avel? No, Your Honor, but divorce is difficult, I know. However, given the circumstances, fraud, violence, false accusations, I believe you have grounds. I'll write a recommendation to the territorial court. In the meantime, you're free to go where you wish. As the judge banged his gavel, dismissing the hearing, the courtroom burst into chaos. People surged forward to congratulate Margot, to shake Sawyer's hand, to glare at Cole and Whitmore as they beat a hasty retreat. Esther Washington found herself surrounded by townswomen, all praising her courage. Mrs. Delaney was already offering her a job at the apothecary. Through it all, Margot stood as if in a daze. Free. She was actually free. Sawyer made his way to her side, and she collapsed against him, tears finally coming. It's over, he murmured. You're safe. Is it Lucas won't give up? He'll send more men, or come himself. His pride won't allow. Then we'll face that when it comes together. Sheriff Dobson approached. Ma'am, you're free to go, though I'd recommend staying in town a few days. Just to be safe, make sure Cole and his men actually leave. She'll stay with me, Mrs. Delaney announced. Got a spare room and a shotgun. Anyone wants to cause trouble, they'll answer to both. As they filed out of the courthouse, Sawyer noticed a familiar figure near the telegraph office. Whitmore was sending a message. No doubt to Lucas Avel. The fight wasn't over, just postponed. That evening, the Continental Hotel's dining room had been transformed for an impromptu celebration. Half the town seemed to be there, toasting Margot's freedom and Esther's courage. Sawyer sat quietly in a corner, nursing a whiskey and watching Margot laugh at something the baker's wife said. It was the first time he'd seen her truly smile, and it transformed her face. She's something, ain't she? Henrik the blacksmith dropped into the chair beside him. Takes a strong woman to stand up like that. Yes, Sawyer agreed. Course, takes a strong man to stand with her. Not many would have done what you did. Sawyer shrugged. Anyone would have... No, Henrik cut him off. They wouldn't. I've seen men turn away from worse injustices because it was easier. You didn't. That matters. Across the room, Margot caught Sawyer's eye and excused herself from her admirers. She made her way over, sitting beside him with a sigh of relief. Too much celebration, he asked. I'm grateful, truly, but... She looked around at the happy crowd. They don't understand that this isn't the end. Lucas has power, influence. He can make life difficult for anyone who helped me. Let him try, Henrik rumbled. This town takes care of its own. But I'm not. You are now, the blacksmith said firmly. After today, you're one of us. Anyone has a problem with that, they can discuss it with me. He flexed massive hands that could bend iron. Usually don't take long. Later, Sawyer walked Margot to Mrs. Delaney's house. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead. They stopped on the porch, suddenly awkward. I should get back to the homestead tomorrow, Sawyer said. Check on the animals. Of course. You could. That is, the job's still yours if you want it. She smiled softly. I think I need a few days to figure out who I am now. Without fear, without running. But yes, I'd like that. If you'll have me. Always, he said, then colored at the implication. I mean, the job's always there. She rose on her toes and kissed his cheek. I know what you meant. And Sawyer, thank you for everything, for seeing me as more than a runaway bride or a prize to be claimed, for giving me a chance to be myself. You've always been yourself, he said. I just gave you a safe place to show it. She slipped inside, And Sawyer stood on the porch a moment longer, hand touching the spot where she'd kissed him. Change was coming. He could feel it in the air. Lucas Avil wouldn't let this insult pass. There would be more trouble, more danger. But for tonight, Margot was safe. She was free. And maybe, just maybe, they had a future worth fighting for. As he walked back toward the boarding house, Sawyer found himself thinking about his empty cabin, about the life he'd built in solitude. It had been enough once, but now, having tasted what it was like to have someone to protect, someone to stand with, he wasn't sure he could go back to that emptiness. The lonely cowboy had ridden into town for supplies. He'd found so much more than bread. He'd found purpose. He'd found courage he didn't know he had. And maybe, though he hardly dared think it, he'd found love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, under the vast Wyoming sky, Sawyer Reed walked with a lighter step than he had in years. The fight for Margot's freedom had been won. The fight for their future was just beginning. The letter arrived 2 weeks later, delivered by a special courier who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else but the Wyoming territory. Sawyer was mending a fence when the man rode up, his Eastern clothes marking him as clearly as a brand. Mr. Sawyer Reed. "That's me." The courier handed over a thick envelope sealed with red wax. "From Mr. Lucas Avil. I'm instructed to wait for a reply." Sawyer broke the seal and read, his jaw tightening with each line. Margot, who had been working in the garden, came over at his expression. "What is it?" He handed her the letter. Her face went white as she read. "He's coming here," she whispered, "with lawyers, witnesses, and what he calls irrefutable evidence of my theft. He's demanding a new hearing, claiming the first was biased and improper." The courier shifted uncomfortably. "Your reply, sir." "Tell Mr. Avil he's welcome to present his case to Judge Thornton like any other citizen." Sawyer said evenly, "The law applies to everyone equally out here." After the courier left, Margot sank onto the porch steps. "He won't stop. You know that, don't you? His pride is wounded. He'll spend every dollar he has to drag me back or see me hanged." "Then we'll be ready," Sawyer said, sitting beside her. "The whole town knows the truth now. Esther's testimony." "Esther." Margot's voice was bitter. "A young black woman's word against a wealthy white man's. How long do you think that will hold up if Lucas brings in expensive lawyers and bought witnesses?" She was right, and they both knew it. The law might claim to be blind, but it had a way of peeking when money was involved. "We need more evidence," Sawyer said, "something that proves definitively that he's lying. The receipt Esther brought is good, but Lucas will claim it's for a different piece. We need something he can't explain away." They spent the next days preparing. Sawyer rode to neighboring towns, talking to anyone who might have information about Lucas Aval's business dealings. Margot wrote letters to old friends in Georgia, carefully worded to avoid revealing her location, but asking for any information about Lucas's activities after she left. It was Esther who provided the breakthrough. She appeared at the homestead one evening, accompanied by Mrs. Delaney. "I remembered something," she said without preamble. "About that night, Mr. Avil had a visitor, late. They argued in the study." "Who was it?" Margot asked. "Mr. Charles Whitman, his business partner. They were shouting about money, about some investment that had gone bad. Mr. Whitman said—" She paused, making sure she had the words right. "He said, 'You promised that money by month's end. I don't care if you have to sell everything the girl brought with her.'" Margot gasped. "The dowry. He was already planning to sell my dowry." "That's why he chose the brooch," Sawyer said slowly. "It was the most valuable, easiest to sell. When you ran, he saw an opportunity. Sell it anyway and blame the theft on you." "But how do we prove it?" Margot asked. "Mr. Whitman," Esther said quietly. "He's not a bad man, just desperate. His daughter's sick, needs treatment. If someone could guarantee her care. "You're suggesting we bribe him?" Margot asked. "I'm suggesting we offer him a way out," Esther corrected. "A chance to tell the truth without losing everything." Sawyer looked at the two women with newfound respect. "How do we reach him?" "I can help with that, Mrs." Delaney spoke up. "My nephew works for Western Union. A carefully worded telegram, maybe a small financial incentive." 3 days later, they had their answer. Charles Whitman would testify, but only if his daughter's medical expenses were guaranteed. Margot didn't hesitate. "I'll sell my grandmother's earrings," she said. "They're the only valuable thing I managed to keep. It's what she would want." "No," Sawyer said firmly. "I've got money saved. Not much, but enough." "I can't let you—" "You're not letting me. I'm choosing to." He took her hands. "We're partners now, aren't we, in all things?" The look that passed between them said more than words could. The new hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. By Sunday, Dry Creek was overflowing with strangers. Lucas Avil had arrived with an entourage that took over the entire Continental Hotel. He was everything Sawyer had expected, handsome in that polished way that spoke of money and privilege, with cold eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. They passed on the street that evening, Lucas flanked by his lawyers and bodyguards, Sawyer walking with Margot and several townspeople. "My dear wife," Lucas said smoothly, stopping in their path. "You're looking rustic." "Mr. Avil," Margot replied, her voice steady though Sawyer could feel her trembling. "This charade has gone on long enough." Lucas continued. "Come back willingly, and I'll forgive everything. We can start fresh." "No." His mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly beneath. "You always were too stubborn for your own good. It was something I planned to correct." "That's enough." Sawyer stepped forward. "The lady said no." Lucas looked him up and down dismissively. The hero Cowboy. Tell me, what's she promising you the same thing she promised me?" "Devotion, loyalty. She's quite good at promises until she gets what she wants." Sawyer's fist connected with Lucas's jaw before anyone could react. The man went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. "Sawyer, no!" Margot grabbed his arm as Lucas's bodyguard surged forward. "Stop!" Sheriff Dobson appeared, badge glinting. "Everyone calm down. Mr. Avil, you all right?" Lucas climbed to his feet, dabbing at his nose with a handkerchief. "I want him arrested for assault." "Didn't see any assault," the sheriff said mildly. "Saw you harassing a lady and getting what you deserved, but no assault." "I have witnesses." "So do I." Dobson gestured to the crowd of townspeople. "Funny thing about witnesses. They see what they want to see. Now move along. All of you. Save it for the courtroom." That night, Sawyer couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch, watching the stars and thinking about the morning. Everything hung on Charles Whitman's testimony, on whether the man's conscience outweighed his fear. Margot joined him, wrapped in a blanket. "Can't sleep either." "Too much thinking." She sat beside him, close enough that he could feel her warmth. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know, these past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. Even with everything else, I've felt more myself than I ever have." "Margot, let me finish. If things go badly, if I have to go back with him, I need you to promise you won't do anything foolish. Don't throw your life away for—" He silenced her with a kiss, pouring all his feelings into the contact. When they parted, both were breathless. "I'm not letting him take you," he said firmly. "Not tomorrow, not ever." "The law." "Hang the law. If it comes to it, we'll run California, Oregon, Canada, somewhere he can't reach." "You'd give up everything, your home, your land." "None of it means anything without you." She kissed him again, and this time neither pulled away for a long while. The courthouse was packed the next morning, people standing along the walls and crowding the doorway. Judge Thornton looked displeased by the circus atmosphere, but called the hearing to order. Lucas's lawyer, a distinguished man named Pemberton, presented his case with theatrical flair. He had affidavits from servants swearing they'd seen Margot near the study. He had a jeweler who testified that the brooch was worth even more than originally stated. He painted a picture of a calculating woman who had married for money and fled with her prize. Through it all, Margot sat straight-backed, her face composed. Only Sawyer, sitting close enough to touch, could see the white knuckles of her clasped hands. "Call Charles Whitman," Judge Thornton ordered. The courtroom stirred as a nervous man in a worn suit made his way to the witness chair. Lucas's expression darkened. He clearly hadn't expected this. "Mr. Whitman," the judge began. "What is your relationship to Mr. Aval?" We were business partners, Your Honor." Whitman glanced at Lucas, then away. The partnership dissolved after Mrs. Aval left. There were disagreements about money. "Can you tell us about the night of the wedding?" Whitman took a deep breath. "I went to see Lucas that night, late. We had an investment that had gone bad, and I needed my share of the money for my daughter's treatment." "And what did Mr. Aval say?" "He said he didn't have it, that the wedding had cost too much. I reminded him that he'd promised the money, and he said—" Whitman paused, gathering courage. "He said he'd sell some of the dowry items, that his wife wouldn't miss them." The courtroom erupted. Lucas shot to his feet. "That's a lie." "Order!" Judge Thornton banged his gavel. "Continue. Mr. Whitman." "When Mrs. Aval fled, Lucas saw an opportunity. He sold the brooch. I was there when he did it, and then claimed she'd stolen it. Said the bounty would bring her back, and he'd have both the money and his wife." "Why didn't you speak up before?" Whitman's shoulders sagged. "My daughter, Your Honor. Lucas threatened to ruin me, to ensure she never got treatment. But I can't. I can't be part of sending an innocent woman to prison or worse." Lucas's lawyer tried to discredit Whitman, but the damage was done. When Esther testified again, confirming the argument she'd overheard, the case crumbled entirely. Judge Thornton's ruling was swift and harsh. "Mr. Aval, you've perverted justice for your own ends. You've filed false charges, paid for false testimony, and attempted to use the law as a weapon. I'm dismissing all charges against Mrs. Aval permanently. Furthermore, I'm recommending you be charged with perjury and fraud. As for the marriage," the judge continued, "given the evidence of coercion and violence, I'm granting an immediate annulment. Mrs. Aval, you're free to resume your maiden name or choose another as you see fit." Lucas stood slowly, his composure finally cracking. "You think you've won?" he snarled at Margot. "You think this ends it? I have resources you can't imagine. I'll destroy everyone who helped you. This whole worthless town." "Oh, Mr. Aval," Sheriff Dobson interrupted. "You're under arrest for assault, fraud, and making threats. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it." As the sheriff's deputies led Lucas away, still ranting, the courtroom burst into celebration. People surged forward to congratulate Margot, to shake Sawyer's hand, to pat Charles Whitman on the back and assure him his daughter would be cared for. In the chaos, Margot found Sawyer's hand and held tight. "Is it really over?" "The legal part. Yes, the rest." He smiled. "The rest is just beginning." That evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Sawyer and Margot stood on the porch of the homestead. The place that had been his refuge was now their home. Lucas Aval was in jail awaiting transport back to Georgia. Charles Whitman's daughter was on her way to a hospital in Denver, her treatment paid for by a collection taken up by the grateful townspeople. "What now?" Margot asked, leaning against Sawyer's shoulder. "Now we live," he said simply. We work the land, raise horses, maybe add some cattle, build a life together. Together, she repeated, savoring the word. I like the sound of that. As the stars began to appear, Sawyer thought about the twists of fate that had brought them here. A lonely ride to town for supplies, a desperate woman begging for bread. Choices made in moments that changed everything. No regrets? Margot asked, as if reading his thoughts. Not one, he said, and meant it. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and somewhere an owl hunted in the darkness. But on the porch of the little homestead, two people who had found each other against all odds sat in comfortable silence, planning a future neither had dared to dream of alone. The lonely cowboy had found his home. The runaway bride had found her freedom. And together, they had found something worth more than all the ruby brooches in the world. Spring came to Wyoming like a hesitant visitor, melting snow revealing the green promises beneath. Margot stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching Sawyer work with a new colt in the corral. 3 months had passed since the trial. 3 months of building a life together that neither had quite dared to name. Miss Margot, a voice called from the trail. She turned to see young Tommy Henderson from town, riding hard. What is it, Tommy? Ma sent me to fetch you. The Carlson baby's coming early, and she's having troubles. Ma says you know about birthing. Margot was already reaching for her medical bag. A gift from Mrs. Delaney. Word had spread about her knowledge of herbs and healing, learned from her grandmother's kitchen and the household servants who had raised her. Sawyer, she called. I'm needed in town. He was beside her in moments, reading the situation. I'll saddle Duchess. I can ride myself. I know you can, but I'm coming with you. The ride to town was swift, and they found the Carlson homestead in controlled chaos. Anna Carlson was a young woman, barely 20, and this was her first child. Fear filled her eyes as another contraction seized her. Thank God. Mrs. Henderson said as Margot entered. She's been laboring since yesterday evening. Margot washed her hands and examined the frightened woman, her movements calm and confident. The baby's turned wrong, she said quietly to Mrs. Henderson. But I think I can help. For the next 4 hours, Margot worked with quiet intensity, using techniques she'd learned from old Martha, her grandmother's midwife. Sawyer waited on the porch with Mr. Carlson, offering silent support to the anxious father. When the baby's cry finally pierced the air, the relief was palpable. Margot emerged, exhausted but smiling, cradling a healthy baby girl. She's perfect, she told the tearful parents. Both of you did wonderfully. As they rode home, Sawyer glanced at Margot with new admiration. Where did you learn all that? Necessity, she said simply. After Mother died, the servants were family. They taught me everything they knew, said a lady should understand life's beginnings and endings. She paused. Lucas hated that I knew such things, said it was beneath my station. Lucas was a fool. Yes, she agreed softly. He was. The next weeks brought a steady stream of visitors to their door. Word of Margot's skill had spread, and people came seeking help for everything from colicky babies to persistent coughs. She never turned anyone away, often accepting payment in eggs, preserved goods, or simple gratitude. It was after one such visit, as Margot was organizing her growing collection of medicinal herbs, that Sawyer finally voiced what had been building between them. Marry me, he said suddenly. Margot dropped the bundle of dried lavender she was holding. What? He crossed to her, taking her hands. I know you just got free of one marriage, and maybe you're not ready to think about another, but I love you, Margot. Have since, well, probably since you stood up in that courtroom and faced down your demons. I want to build a real life with you, not just as partners, but as husband and wife. Her eyes filled with tears. Sawyer, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know where I stand. She silenced him with a kiss. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes, I'll marry you. But Sawyer, I need you to understand I'm not the woman I was. I can't be the ornamental wife, the silent partner. I need to be myself, to help people, I wouldn't want you any other way, he assured her. I fell in love with a woman who gathered crumbs with dignity, who learned to shoot to defend herself, who delivers babies and heals hurts. Be yourself, always. The wedding was set for early summer, and the whole town threw itself into preparations with enthusiasm. Mrs. Delaney organized the women into sewing circles, creating a wedding dress from cream-colored muslin and lace donated from various sources. Henrik, the blacksmith, forged a special gift, a new plow that he claimed would make their farming more efficient, but everyone knew was his wedding present. It was Esther who brought the most unexpected gift. She arrived a week before the wedding with a package wrapped in brown paper. "This came to the hotel," she said, handing it to Margot. "From Georgia." Inside was a letter and a small velvet box. Margot's hands trembled as she read aloud. "Dear Miss Prescott, you don't know me, but I am Lucas Avell's sister, Catherine. I am writing to apologize for my family's actions and to right a wrong. Enclosed is your grandmother's brooch, the real one. Lucas sold a replica to that jeweler, keeping the original as insurance. I found it in his papers after his arrest. I remember you from the wedding. How kind you were to me despite my brother's behavior. You deserve better than what our family gave you. I hope you find happiness in your new life. Also, you should know that Lucas's lawyer has negotiated a plea. He'll serve 2 years in prison and pay substantial fines. More importantly, he signed papers relinquishing any claim to you or your property. You're truly free. With deepest respect, Catherine Avell." Margot opened the box with shaking hands. The brooch lay nestled in velvet, its rubies catching the light like drops of blood. "It's beautiful," Esther breathed. "It was my grandmother's most prized possession," Margot said softly. "She wore it at her wedding, said it would bring luck and love to all who wore it after." She looked up at Sawyer. "I thought I'd never see it again." "Will you wear it at our wedding?" he asked. "Yes," she decided, "but not as a symbol of the past, as a promise for the future." The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright. They'd chosen to hold it at the homestead, under the big cottonwood tree that provided shade in summer. Reverend Calhoun had agreed to officiate, and it seemed the entire territory had come to witness. Margot stood in the cabin, letting Mrs. Delaney and the other women fuss over her appearance. The dress was simple but beautiful, and her grandmother's brooch gleamed at her throat. But it was the serenity in her face that made her truly radiant. "You're sure about this, Mrs.?" Delaney asked. "After everything you've been through, rushing into another marriage—" "I'm not rushing," Margot said calmly. "I'm choosing. There's a difference." Outside, Sawyer waited in his best clothes, which meant his newest work pants and a shirt misses. Henderson had insisted on pressing. Tommy Henderson stood as his best man, proud as a peacock in his role. When Margot appeared, walking alone down the makeshift aisle with her head high, Sawyer felt his breath catch. This wasn't a woman being given away or traded. This was a woman choosing her own path. Reverend Calhoun kept the ceremony simple, as requested. When he asked who gave this woman in marriage, Margot spoke for herself. "I give myself," she said clearly, "freely and with joy." The vows they exchanged were their own words, not the traditional phrases. Sawyer promised to respect her independence, to support her healing work, to stand beside her in all things. Margot promised to build a life with him, to trust in his love, to face whatever came together. When Reverend Calhoun pronounced them married and said Sawyer could kiss his bride, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next territory. The celebration lasted well into the night. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by neighbors. Henrik had set up a dancing area, and fiddle music filled the air. Even Sheriff Dobson was seen attempting a reel with his wife. But the moment Sawyer treasured most came later, when the guests had finally departed and they stood alone under the stars. Margot still wore her wedding dress, but she'd let her hair down, and it tumbled around her shoulders in waves. "No regrets?" he asked, echoing her question from months before. "Not one," she assured him. "Today was perfect." Even without the fancy hotel ballroom, the orchestra, the $100 flowers. She laughed. "Especially without those things. Today was real. Every person here came because they wanted to celebrate with us, not because society demanded it. Every gift was given with love, not obligation." She fingered the brooch. "And I wore this because I chose to, not because it was part of a transaction." They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. Then Margot spoke again, almost shyly. "Sawyer, there's something I should tell you." He looked at her, concerned. "What is it?" "I've been tired lately and a bit sick in the mornings. At first I thought it was just the excitement, but—" She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I think we're going to have a baby." The joy that flooded through him was like nothing he'd ever felt. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be. Are you happy?" "Happy?" He pulled back to look at her, letting her see everything in his eyes. "Margot, you've given me more than I ever dreamed of. A partner, a purpose, a family. Happy doesn't begin to cover it." She kissed him then, long and sweet, and they stood wrapped in each other as the stars wheeled overhead. In the barn, Duchess whickered softly, and from somewhere in the darkness came the call of an owl. The homestead that had once echoed with loneliness now hummed with the promise of new life. "Come inside," Margot whispered finally. "It's getting cold," as they walked hand in hand toward their home. Sawyer thought about the journey that had brought them here. A lonely cowboy riding into town for supplies, a desperate woman gathering crumbs. Two broken souls who had found wholeness in each other. Their story was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, harsh winters, failed crops, the uncertainties of frontier life. The baby would bring joy, but also worry. And somewhere in a Georgia prison, Lucas Abel nursed his wounded pride and perhaps plotted revenge. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, Sawyer Reed and Margot Prescott Reed were simply a man and woman in love, starting their married life in a cabin on the Wyoming prairie. They had each other, they had their community, and they had hope. In the morning, they would begin the real work of building a life together. Margot would tend her herbs and help bring new life into the world. Sawyer would work the land and care for their animals. Together, they would prepare for their child, adding to their home and their hearts. But that was tomorrow. Tonight was for celebrating the miracle of second chances, for rejoicing in love found in the most unexpected places. As they closed the door behind them, shutting out the night, they were already home. The lonely cowboy was lonely no more. The runaway bride had found where she belonged, and in a small homestead on the edge of forever, two hearts beat as one, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. 20 years had passed since that winter day when Sawyer Reed rode into town alone for supplies and found a hungry bride begging for bread. The homestead had grown into a proper ranch, with a larger house, expanded barns, and pastures dotted with horses and cattle. But more than the land had flourished, a family had taken root and blossomed. Margot stood on the porch, her auburn hair now touched with silver, watching her eldest daughter help with the morning chores. Sarah Reed, 19 and as spirited as her mother, moved among the horses with natural grace. Behind her, 17-year-old James worked alongside his father, their movements synchronized from years of shared labor. "Mama, Mrs. Carlson's here," called 12-year-old Ruth from the kitchen, where she was helping prepare breakfast. Anna Carlson, whose difficult birth had been one of Margot's first midwifing successes in Dry Creek, climbed down from her wagon with a smile. Her daughter Emma, now 20 and newly married, sat beside her. "Morning. Margot, I hope we're not too early." "Never too early for friends," Margot assured her. embracing both women. "Emma, you're glowing. How are you feeling?" "Nervous," the young woman admitted, "but knowing you'll be there when my time comes helps." It was a common sentiment over the years. Margot had delivered dozens of babies, treated countless ailments, and become the unofficial healer for 3 towns. Her knowledge, combined with supplies from Mrs. Delaney's expanded apothecary, had saved many lives. "Sarah," Margot called. "Would you show Emma the new herb garden? She might want to start her own." As the young women walked off together, Anna settled into a rocking chair with a sigh. "Hard to believe it's been 20 years since you brought my Emma into the world. Seems like yesterday you were the talk of the town, the runaway bride who faced down Lucas Evel." Margot smiled. "That feels like a lifetime ago. Several lifetimes, actually." "Whatever happened to him, Evel? I mean, last I heard, he drunk himself to death in New Orleans. His sister Catherine wrote to tell me. She manages the family business now. Turned it into something respectable." Margot fingered the ruby brooch she still wore on special occasions. "She says I inspired her to stand up to him. Imagine that." Sawyer and James approached, dusty from their morning work, even in his 50s. Sawyer moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. The years had weathered him like good leather, lined but strong. "Ah, Mrs. Carlson, Emma," he greeted them warmly. "Staying for breakfast?" "Wouldn't miss it," Anna replied. "Your Ruth makes the best biscuits in the territory." Ruth beamed at the praise as they gathered around the expanded dining table. It was moments like these, simple, domestic, filled with warmth, that Margot treasured most. She caught Sawyer's eye across the table and saw her contentment reflected there. After breakfast, as their guests prepared to leave, a rider appeared on the horizon. Sheriff Dobson, grayer but still sharp-eyed, tipped his hat as he dismounted. "Morning, folks. Sawyer, Margot. Might I have a word?" They stepped aside, and the sheriff's expression grew serious. "There's a situation in town. Group of men rode in yesterday, asking questions about the Reed family, specifically about Margot's past." Margot felt a chill despite the warm morning. "After all these years?" "These aren't bounty hunters," Dobson clarified. "They're newspaper men from back east. Seems someone's writing a book about notorious women of the West, and your story caught their attention. They're offering money for interviews, digging up old scandals." Sawyer's jaw tightened. "We'll handle it." "I know you will," Dobson said. "Just wanted you to be prepared. The town's staying quiet so far, but you know how these types can be persistent." After the sheriff left, Margot and Sawyer walked to their favorite spot under the cottonwood tree where they'd been married. Its branches had grown broad, providing shade for the small headstones beneath 2 babies lost between Sarah and James, their grief now softened by time. "Are you worried?" Sawyer asked. "No," Margot said after a moment. "Not really. What can they write that hasn't been said? That I was a runaway bride, that I found love and built a life. Let them tell that story. I'm not ashamed of it. The children know the truth. We've never hidden it from them." She leaned against his shoulder. "Besides, I have a feeling the town won't make things easy for these newspaper men." She was right. When the family went to town the next day for supplies, they found the entire community had closed ranks. The newspaper men, 3 pompous Easterners in city clothes, were met with polite but firm silence wherever they went. "Don't know any Margot Evel," Henrik the blacksmith rumbled when questioned. His massive arms crossed. "No Margot Reed. Fine woman. Delivered 5 of my grandchildren." "Runaway bride, Mrs." Delaney sniffed when approached. "Young man, the only thing that ran away around here was good sense when you decided to come bothering honest folk." The frustration on the newspapermen's faces was almost comical. They'd clearly expected to find shameful secrets, and instead found a beloved member of the community. It was young Emma Carlson who delivered the final blow. Overhearing their questions in the general store, She marched up to them with fire in her eyes. "You want a story?" she said. "I'll give you one. 20 years ago, Margot Reed saved my life and my mother's when I was born. Since then, she's delivered half the babies in this territory, nursed families through sickness, and taught dozens of women about herbs and healing. She's faced down blizzards to reach women in labor and sat up all night with sick children. That's your story. A woman who took her second chance and used it to give life and hope to others." The crowd in the store burst into spontaneous applause. The newspapermen, faced with such unified opposition, left town the next morning. That evening, the Reed family gathered for dinner as always. Sarah regaled them with stories from her day helping Doc Morrison. She was apprenticing with him, planning to become the territory's first formally trained female doctor. James discussed plans for breeding a new line of horses with his father. Ruth showed off a sampler she'd embroidered with medicinal plants, combining her mother's knowledge with her own artistic talents. "I heard what happened in town today," Sarah said. "Emma Carlson standing up to those men." "The whole town stood up," Margot corrected. "That's what community does. It protects its own." "The way they protected you all those years ago," James added. He'd heard the story countless times, how the town had ridden out to help his parents. "And the way you'll protect others," Sawyer said. "That's how it works. We help each other. We stand for what's right, even when it's hard." Later, as the children cleaned up and prepared for bed, Margot and Sawyer sat on the porch as they did most evenings. The ranch spread out before them in the fading light, proof of what two people could build together with love, hard work, and determination. "Do you ever think about it?" Margot asked. "How different our lives might have been. If I hadn't gone to town that day, if you hadn't been in that bakery." Sawyer pulled her close. "I try not to. Can't imagine a life without you. Without all this. I was thinking more about if I'd stayed with Lucas. If I hadn't run, then you wouldn't have been you." Sawyer said simply, "The woman I love is the one who had the courage to leave, to fight for her freedom, to build something real. Every choice you made led us here." A wolf howled in the distance, and from the barn came the answering whinny of horses. Ruth's laughter drifted from the house as Sarah told her another story. These were the sounds of home, of a life well lived. "Grandma, Grandpa," a small voice called out. Their youngest grandchild, Anna Carlson's grandson, ran toward them with the unsteady gait of a 3-year-old. Emma followed, smiling apologetically. "Sorry, he escaped while I was talking with Sarah about her studies." "Never apologize for bringing joy," Margot said, scooping up the little boy. "We were just sitting here thinking how blessed we are." As 4 generations gathered on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, Sawyer thought about that long-ago winter day. The lonely cowboy rode in town alone for supplies, but found a hungry bride begging for bread, and discovered that sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as simple acts of kindness. The stars began to appear, same as they had that night when he'd first brought Margot home, but now they looked down on so much more than a cabin and a barn. They illuminated a legacy of love, compassion, and courage that would ripple through generations. "Tell us the story, Grandma," little Thomas pleaded, about the bread and the brave lady. Margot smiled, settling the child more comfortably. "Well, it was winter, and a lonely cowboy went to town," as her voice carried on the evening air, weaving the familiar tale once more. Sawyer put his arm around his daughter and watched his wife work her magic. Some stories, he knew, never grew old. Some loves only deepened with time, and some choices, made in moments of compassion, echoed through eternity. The homestead settled into peaceful evening, full of family and memory and hope. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, as all tomorrows did, but tonight, surrounded by the fruits of a love that had begun with shared bread and simple kindness, the Reed family was complete. And in the telling and retelling of their story, in the lives touched and the babies delivered and the healing given, Margot and Sawyer Reed had written themselves into the history of the Wyoming Territory, not as a scandal or a sensation, but as something far more precious, an example of what two people could accomplish when they chose love over fear, community over isolation, and hope over despair. The lonely cowboy was lonely no more. The hungry bride had found her feast. And in their union, countless others had found inspiration to reach for their own second chances, their own unexpected happiness, their own love stories written in the vast spaces of the American West. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying this tale. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Margot and Sawyer's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more tales of love, courage, and redemption in the Old West. Don't forget to like this video and hit the hype button to help more listeners discover this story. Your support means everything and helps keep these stories alive for others to enjoy.